Hello everyone and welcome to the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. Today is episode number 20, and on today's show, I'll be discussing all things food plots and the things that work for me on my properties here in northern New York. I'm hoping this is going to be a very informative show. Let's jump right into it. Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the TradCast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. And this show is for the week of May 15th, 2015. And today on the show, I'm going to be discussing a lot of things about food plots and some techniques, tactics, and philosophies that I use on my food plots here in northern New York. And the goal of this show is to help anybody else who wants to get into food plotting, and hopefully you can pick up a thing or two from this podcast, which will help you with your food plots. Now, before I jump into the discussion, I do want to give you guys just a couple of quick team updates with my work schedule this past week. I haven't had time to get out and turkey hunt this past week. So I don't have any updates for you guys as far as how things are going in the turkey woods. I'm hoping this weekend to get out on Saturday and Sunday, and hopefully I can have some luck. And if I do, I will share that with you on next week's show. I also wanted to give you guys another update, and it has to do with food plots, but this past weekend, the weekend of the 9th and 10th, I did a lot of work on my own food plots, did a bunch of liming and some fertilizing, and I'll cover that a little bit later on in this podcast when we talk about that particular topic within food plotting. But just wanted to give you guys that quick update. Here it is, middle of May, and it's not only turkey season, but it also is food plot season, especially for perennial food plots, and getting those off to a good start. So I'm trying to balance turkey hunting with making sure I got my food plots in order. So don't have a ton of updates for you guys this week. Of course, I'm continuing to shoot my traditional bows every day. I'm really enjoying shooting my setup. I'm still shooting the gold tip carbons with the 175 grain heads, and I'm just continuing to practice and just continuing to try to become the best traditional shooter that I can. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into this week's show about food plots, and I'm going to start out by just briefly explaining the things that I want to cover in this show. All right, now the first thing I'm going to talk about is going to be goals and objectives for your food plots. No food plot is complete without establishing your goals and objectives first, and then I want to touch on site preparation, how I go about actually preparing my food plot locations. And then I want to also touch on soil preparation and the importance of that. And I'm also going to be discussing spring, summer plantings, the importance of those, and some things that I do on my property in regards to the spring and summer food plots. And then I'm also going to touch on some fall plantings and some things that you want to keep in mind for your fall food plot plantings. And then we're going to touch on hunting food plots, which is primarily what I do here on my properties, is mostly small hunting food plots, and there's a lot of stuff I want to cover on that. And then I'm going to finish things up with discussing some things to monitor your food plots and the importance of that in not only seeing what's utilizing your food plots, but also making sure that your food plots are continuing to stay healthy and attract animals. So let's get into the first topic, which is goals and objectives. Now, this is a very important aspect of your food plotting. Let's face it, I mean, with anything, you have to have specific goals and objectives, and this is certainly very important with food plotting. And what I mean by when I say goals and objectives is whether you're going to do one food plot or you're going to do 5 food plots or 15 food plots. Every food plot has to have a specific goal in mind and an objective that you're looking to accomplish with that food plot. And typically, for me anyways, that boils into one of 2 categories. Either this food plot is going to be what's often referred to as a destination feed field, which is just as simply a larger food plot where you're looking to attract a lot of deer to and just feed deer in. It's not necessarily a hunting food plot, although you certainly could hunt it. The main principle here and the main objective is simply to feed deer and provide them with the nutrition. And then, of course, for myself, the other category that I put my food plots into is hunting food plots. So whenever I'm planning a food plot, the first thing that I do is I look at this plot and say, okay, is my goal here to simply feed deer and give them the highest possible nutrition at this food plot and make this a safe place where they can continue to come day in and day out and never have to worry about getting bumped? Or is this going to be a hunting food plot and a place where I'm going to look to target and kill animals within that food plot? So, and depending on which type of food plot you're going to go with or make in each specific location, it's going to change what you want to plant, how you're going to set that food plot up, and it just changes a lot of variables about the food plot. So establishing your goals and your objectives is a very important part of the food plot process, and in my opinion, it's the place where you want to start out and really make sure that you have a well-defined goal and set of circumstances that you want to accomplish with this food plot. It's going to make selecting your blends, selecting the design of the food plot, the location, the specific location. It's going to make all of these variables a lot easier if you go into it knowing exactly what you want to accomplish with this food plot. Okay, and now I wanted to touch on some principles that I have found when it comes to both destination feed fields and the hunting food plots. And I want to start out with the destination feed fields. And typically, destination feed fields are usually food plots or fields that are at least 3 acres in size, if not larger. And these destination food plots are more open type food plots. They don't have as much edge habitat, and that's not really a requirement because the goal with a destination food plot isn't necessarily to hunt that food plot. It's simply a place where you want to put in a lot of forage and have a place where deer can come at night and feed and get the nutrition and build those core areas and those specific routes of travel daily on your property. Now, for my own particular situation here in northern New York, I've got a 45-acre piece of ground and a 90-acre piece of ground, and they're both pretty thick woods. And I actually do not have any destination feed fields on my properties, although on one of my farms I do have some local farmers' fields that border my property, which almost kind of acts like a destination feed field because the farmers are always putting in, crops, and in the fall they're often putting in winter rye and stuff like that, which attracts deer usually every day after dark in the evening. So even though I don't specifically have any destination feed fields which are my own, I do have a few that border one of my properties, and so I don't really have to have any on there, and I really just don't have the means to create any destination feed fields because, like I said, those are typically larger than 3 acres in size, and your main goal there is simply to feed deer and keep deer on your property and keep pressure low at those areas. Now I want to talk about hunting food plots, which is pretty much all that I do on my properties. I've got, between my 2 farms, I've got like 11 or 12 food plots now, And actually this year is the first year that I'm going to be planning on putting at least the overwhelming majority of these into clover. Most of them already are. I might convert one or two over to a fall planting later on this summer, but I currently have most of them set up in perennial clovers and some chicory and even some alfalfa. But the thing with hunting food plots is, of course, this is an area you're going to be hunting, and it's very important that, in my opinion anyways, that you keep these hunting food plots small and with a lot of edge habitat. From my experience here, hunting my food plots and through monitoring my trail cameras over the years at my food plots, I have found that pretty much the smaller these food plots are and the more edge habitat that you have in these food plots, the more daylight utilization you're going to get from all age classes of deer, whether it be, does, doe family groups, small bucks, or even mature bucks. So my typical goal at my food plots, at my hunting food plots, is I'm looking to keep these relatively small. I like keeping them the largest I have is a half-acre food plot, roughly. I like to keep them anywhere from I've got a food plot that's as small as about maybe 1/15 of an acre, and I've got some that are as big as a half of an acre. But I find that keeping them relatively small and keeping a lot of edge habitat at that food plot is going to help increase your daylight utilization at those food plots. Okay, and now I wanted to talk a little bit about site preparation. Now that you've got your goals established, you've determined you want to put in a destination feed field or a hunting food plot. Once you've got that goal chosen and that objective established, now you have to get into the nitty-gritty of actually creating this food plot. And there's several ways that you can do that. Obviously, the most conventional way is with tractor equipment, which would probably be most likely utilized with your destination feed fields. I mean, anytime you have a food plot that's 3 acres in size or larger, you're going to need a pretty good sized piece of equipment to efficiently create and maintain that food plot. So for destination feed fields, you're more than likely going to want to get access to some kind of tractor equipment. Rather it means buying your own, which can be very expensive, or oftentimes you can maybe rent one from a local farmer for a day or two, or you can hire a local farmer to plant that food plot for you. So tractor equipment is pretty much going to be a necessity if you want to create very large destination feed fields. Again, I don't have any destination feed fields per se on my property, and I don't have access to a tractor and that larger equipment. So I haven't really done any food plotting in that regards. But just keep in mind, if a destination feed field is something that you want to put in on your property, you're probably gonna want to plan on finding a way to get access to large tractor equipment. And a couple of my recommendations there would be, if you can't afford to buy your own tractor and all the equipment, would be to see if you could hook up with a local farmer and either rent his equipment for a day, or maybe just simply hire him to do that for you. Now, the second way to create these food plots with the site preparation, and it's the way that I've done a lot with, is with ATVs. And you can get a lot of work done with an ATV. I've got an ATV that I've had for several years and have done a ton of food plot work with it. And you can get a ton of ATV implements that'll help you put in your food plots. You can get they make chisel plows now that you can get. You can buy disc harrows. I have a very heavy-duty disc harrow for my ATV that works outstanding. I've had great results with that over the years. And in my experience, when you're talking about putting in a food plot that's up around that 1/3 to a half of an acre in size, you're probably going to want to use an ATV, because even with an ATV, it's still a lot of work. And you want to be as efficient as you can putting in these food plots and maintaining them. So I would recommend going with an ATV and some ATV implements on food plots, 1/3 to a half of an acre in size. And I just want to also touch on the disc harrow that I actually use, and it's actually not made anymore. It was made by Summit, actually, the same company that makes the tree stands, but I have the Summit plot mule, and I bought that unit. It's a disc harrow and a cultipacker unit, and I bought that about 10 years ago, and I can't even count how many hours I have spent, tilling up ground, harrowing ground with that plot mule, and I have put that thing through some pretty tough places, going over stones and tree stumps and, rocks and debris. I mean, you name it, I've hit it with that plot mule. It's a relatively heavy unit. I think that plot mule is like a 700-pound unit with the cultipacker on it. So it's a very heavy-duty unit. It will certainly do all of the ATV disc harrowing work that you need to get accomplished. Now, like I said, the Summit plot mule is no longer in manufacturing, but you can. There are some other good models on there. I know Hunter Specialties was making a pretty good unit back in the day, a couple years ago, and I also know that Antler King has one that I think is called the Sod Buster. That looks like a very heavy duty unit that can do some great work. I don't have any personal experience with that unit, but from what I've seen on YouTube videos and online and some reviews I've read about it, seems like it'd do a great job. But if you want to go with the ATV implements, make sure you do your research. And my personal recommendation on an ATV disc would be to get one that's at least 400 pounds or heavier, because it's just going to do a lot better job and a lot more efficient job at disking that ground up and busting through those sod beds, and it'll really make creating these food plots and a lot more of an efficient process for you. And of course, the other way that you can put in food plots is simply with hand tools. And I would say probably at least half, if not more than half, of the food plots that I've got in my property, I put in using nothing more than hand tools. And as far as a couple of things that I've used, the best device or piece of machinery that I've ever used when it comes to putting in hand tool food plots is without question the large brush weed eater that I bought last summer. I actually bought it to replace an old Troy-Bilt that broke on me after a couple of years of using that. But I purchased a Stihl FS130 is the name of the heavy-duty weed trimmer, and I bought the carbide blade attachment separately, which cost me, I think it was like $40 to buy that blade attachment. But I tell you what, that was without question the best $40 I've ever spent as far as getting that blade attachment, the carbide blade, because I can't even explain, the heavy briars and weeds that you can chew through in a hurry with that system. I do have a video on my YouTube channel from last summer where I explained that machine a little bit and how I was using it and how much I was liking it. I'll leave a link in the show notes to that video. It's a quick review of the Stihl FS130. It's not really a review, it's more or less just a product highlight video. But if you want to see more on the Stihl FS130 or that type of a machine, check out the video. I'll link it in the show notes. It's an awesome piece of equipment for making food plots. I think I paid like $400 for it, or $450. But I tell you what, for putting in food plots the hand tool way, it certainly is a great investment. It's an industrial-sized weed eater, so it can take a lot of work. And I actually was using it with just the regular line trimming attachment. I was using it as a way to mow my clover plots last year. It's a lot of work, mowing your food plots with a weed whacker, but it was effective, and it certainly can be done. So I would recommend giving the Steel FS 130 a look, or something similar, if you want to put in food plots by using hand tools. Okay, and now I wanted to touch a little bit on the actual process that I go through when it comes to getting the site prepared and getting the seed bed prepared for a food plot. Now, in my opinion, to have the optimum results when it comes to planting food plots, especially if you're talking about an area that might not have the best soil, if it's a place way back in the woods that's never been a food plot or never had the soil taken care of, and it's just a place that you're basically turning from woods to a food plot, then in my opinion, this process should be followed to ensure that you get the best results. And the first thing that I do is, when I'm looking to create a food plot in an area, is the first thing you have to do, in my opinion, is look for areas where the native vegetation is already thriving. To me, that's the most important step in locating a good site for a food plot. Because if the native browse and the native vegetation that's growing there naturally, if that vegetation is thriving and excelling, if it's really thick and really nasty and looks like it's going to be just a whole lot of work to get rid of, it's probably the number one place you want to think about putting your food plot. Because if those native plants are growing well there, odds are, with a little bit of work, you can get a food plot crop to grow there just as well also. So when you're looking to select a site for a food plot, my recommendation would be to look for areas where the native vegetation is growing very thick, very dense, and looks like it's going to be the most work to clear out. And once you select that location, now you have to physically get that vegetation off, and that's where I use my Steel FS 130 with the carbide blade. And I literally go in by hand and I just weed whack all of the vegetation, berry briars and saplings and grasses, everything in there. You want to mow down as close to bare ground as you can get it. I'll mow it down to, just a couple of inches in length if I can. And what I do from there is, you want to give that location about 2 weeks to really, let all that thatch, all that leftover debris and stuff that you weed whack out of there, I let that all lay on top of the ground. And after about 2 weeks, now the native vegetation that you've mowed down is going to start to regenerate. And this is going to be a great time to go in there and hit that area with some glyphosate or some Roundup. So after you do your weed whacking and you've given it a couple of weeks to allow those native plants to start regrowing and start regenerating themselves, this is going to be an ideal time to hit them with some spray and kill the area off completely. And when you do this, you're virtually eliminating all weed competition in that food plot. Now, one mistake I've seen guys make on their food plots is they'll do the weed whacking, they'll do all that work to get all that weed whacking done, but then they either won't spray the food plot, and they have all those native weeds and grasses want to regenerate back into the same food plot area, or they'll spray like the same day or a couple of days later. And if you do that, if you spray too close to the time you weed whack, those plants are not going to be able to absorb that Roundup or that herbicide that you spray, and it's not going to do a good job of killing off those native weeds and grasses. So in my opinion, spraying off the remaining vegetation 2 to 3 weeks after you weed whack is a very important step. And then once you have those native weeds and grasses removed, one thing I did last year on most of my food plots, and it worked very well for me, was I actually burned all of the remaining thatch and all of that dead grass. After I sprayed, I waited another couple of weeks and went back into my food plots, and of course everything was just brown and just completely dead. And literally all I had to do in these food plots was just go in and drop a match. And all of those food plots, all of the remaining thatch, burnt to nothing, and it exposed pretty much bare soil at all of those food plot locations. That worked very well for me. The one thing I will recommend is make sure that you at the very least have a way to have water at the location, just in case that fire gets out of hand or starts to burn things you don't want to burn. You want to have some water on site that you can put that out. And last summer, on a couple of instances, I had to use water to kind of keep that fire from getting into areas I didn't want to get into. So if you're going to do the controlled burn, I would certainly recommend having some water on site. Another thing you want to do is contact your local fire dispatch. Let them know you're going to be doing a controlled burn. This way here, if a passerby, calls in and reports a fire, they're going to know that you're already there doing a controlled burn, and they're not going to send, fire crews to come and, and to handle that. They're going to know that you're in there doing that controlled burn. So controlled burning is a great way as a finishing step to expose these food plots, to get all the bare dirt exposed, to get rid of all that thatch and vegetation. The one thing I will add is that if you do the controlled burn, when you do that controlled burn and you burn that off, now you are naturally reintroducing more weed seeds back into that food plot. So it's very key, in my opinion, that you wait from there another week or two. Let that because native vegetation will again start to regrow a few weeks after that burn. You want to go back in and hit that with some more spray. This way here, you're going to have all the native grasses and weeds dead. And then after those 2 weeks expire and you spray again, now you can go in a couple of weeks after that and you can pretty much just drop your seeds onto the bare exposed soil, and you're probably going to get a great food plot. That's what I did on my properties last year, and in all of my food plots I had great seed to soil contact by simply going in there a few weeks after the burn, spraying off those native weeds and grasses, and then dumping my seeds onto the bare earth, and the food plots all grew very, very well. Now, another thing I want to touch on is soil testing. Now, I'm not by any means recommending that you don't do a soil test. I think it is a good step to do. But with that being said, I'm going to be 100% honest here, and I have actually never done a soil test on any of my food plots. And I've honestly never had food plot failure. The one thing I will say is if you're not going to do a soil test, it's extremely important that you put down enough lime and fertilizer. And I'm just going to tell everybody what I do. It's what's working for me in northern New York on my properties. And the typical rule of thumb that I've been doing on all of my food plots is if it's a first year food plot, this is my first year having this food plot, I put down pretty much anywhere from 800 to 1,000 pounds of lime per acre. So that's per acre. It's not 100. It's not 800 to 1,000 pounds on every food plot. It's per acre. So you have to do a little bit of math there, figure out the size of your food plot, and figure out how many pounds of lime to put on per acre. But I find that if you don't have to really do a soil test. At least I haven't had to. But I put down 1,000 pounds of lime per acre pretty much first time around, and my thoughts on that, my thought process is, when it comes to lime, you really can't overdo it, especially if this is a new food plot, and we're not talking about an area that's been a farm field for 15, 20 years that gets regular soil treatment from a farmer. If you're talking about an area that's been in the woods and has never had any work done to it, in my opinion, you really cannot, there's no such thing as putting down too much lime. So I put down 1,000 pounds per acre, And I do that knowing that I'm not wasting that lime. Because I've had a lot of people, tell me, well, yeah, if you don't do a soil test, you're just wasting, how many hundreds of pounds of lime in that food plot. Because if you do a soil test, it may only call for, 200 pounds per acre. But my thought process on that is the lime is going to carry over to that soil for years to come. So if you put down 1,000 pounds this year, you might only have to put down 200 pounds the next year, and maybe 100 pounds a year after that. So I look at it as kind of slowly building up that soil base, building up the base of that soil. And so in my opinion, you really don't ever waste your lime you put on. If anything, you're just kind of banking into the next year or two and helping that soil get that much further ahead of the curve, so to speak, for the years to come. So I don't concern myself too much with putting down too much lime. In my opinion, there's no such thing. If you were to do a soil test and it only called for 400 pounds of lime per acre, and yet you put down 1,000 pounds, in my opinion, you're just that much further off for the next year, and that's that much less you can have to put down the next year. So that's just my thought process when it comes to lime. And the lime that I've had the best results with using is the pelletized lime, because it works great in most spreaders. And I found that a lot of times with the powdered lime, it's very difficult to spread with any kind of spreader. It clogs the spreaders up, and I've even had it break some of the smaller, cheaper spreaders on me. So the pelletized lime, in my opinion, is easier to spread out. It's a little bit more expensive, but in my opinion, it's worth it because it's easier to deal with and easier to deal with smaller hand tool equipment. Okay, and now I wanted to jump into spring and summer food plots. Now, most people are familiar that clover is by far the most popular spring summer food plot, and there's several reasons why that's the case. I mean, clover it's a great food plot blend. I'm having really good results with it on my properties here in northern New York, and what I like about it is the fact that every spring it's pretty much the first thing to green up come spring. It's greening up before any of the other native vegetation and weeds. So by getting that quick green up, it's allowing those clover plants to not only help very early in the spring start providing valuable nutrition and nutrients to the animals using those food plots, but it's also, the clover also is able to get off to a really good start and really start out competing the native weeds and grasses right from the get-go. So clover is an awesome spring-summer blend. I've primarily got that on my food plots, although I do like to add in a little bit of alfalfa, which is another great perennial food plot mix or blend, seed blend that whitetails and turkeys like to eat, and it does very well. It's very drought tolerant. Alfalfa is a very drought tolerant plant. And in my experience, it's pretty well, it's pretty pH balanced and able to do well in relatively low pH soils. So alfalfa is another little additive I like to add to my clover plots, as well as chicory. Chicory is another great blend, another very drought tolerant blend, which is definitely a good add to any perennial food plot. And I also like throwing some chicory in there. And all of these seeds, the clover, the alfalfa, the chicory, they all do a great job in the spring at greening up very quickly and providing that early spring nutrition to your deer and to your turkeys and all the animals that are using your food plots. And it really helps get your food plots off to a great start come springtime. Now, with the clover plots, you've got a lot of maintenance that comes into those. Now, a lot of guys think it's as easy as throwing out some clover one year and that's it for 3 to 5 years, and they don't have to worry about it. And that's simply not the case. If anything, your perennial food plots, your clover food plots, and your alfalfas, those are the food plots that you have to give the most effort into maintaining. And if you don't maintain those, they will be overtaken. 9 times out of 10, they will be overtaken by weeds and grasses. So, in the ways that I maintain my clover food plots is, through mowing. Obviously, is the first way that you want to go about maintaining those clover plots and those perennial food sources, is you want to mow them. And a general rule of thumb that I follow is I usually mow mine pretty much every 5 to 6 weeks during the summertime. Sometimes more, depending on how fast they're growing or what the weather conditions are like. If you get a lot of rain, obviously those food plots are gonna grow faster and might require more mowing. If you get into a prolonged period of drought during the spring and summer months, you'll want to hold off on your mowing. You don't want to mow those plots down too close. So there's a lot of variables that you have to think about when it comes to maintaining your food plots. Weather is always a dictating factor to how you're going to go about maintaining these food plots. But mowing is certainly very important, and it's a great way to help keep your clover plots and your perennial food sources relatively free of weeds. And another way that's very important to maintaining your clover food plots and your perennial food plots is through spraying. And there are various herbicides you can use for this, but you want the key is you want to make sure that this herbicide is a weed and grass selective only herbicide. You don't want to use Roundup or something that's going to kill everything off, because now you're going to kill the entire food plot. So you really have to make sure that you read those labels and that you do your research and make sure that when you're spraying your clover plots or your perennial food sources, you want to make sure that spray is a grass and weed specific herbicide, which is only going to kill off those grasses and weeds, and and allow those clovers and those perennials to to not be killed and to come in even thicker and more lush. So spraying is another great way to maintain your summer and clover food plots, and it's something that's relatively easy to do. It just takes knowing the math and reading those labels on those herbicides and making sure that you're putting down the recommended rates. But spraying can be a great way to maintain your food plots. Okay, and I also wanted to touch on something else that's very key with the perennial food plots, and in fact, I just finished up doing it a few weeks ago here on my properties, and that's frost seeding. Frost seeding is, an awesome way to introduce new seeds into your food plots, and it requires very little work. Now, for anybody who's not familiar, what frost seeding is it's simply the process of going into your food plots very early spring, typically right after the snow melts and after all of the snow, watershed, dries up in the springtime. Get into those food plots. All you need is a little shoulder seeder. Get in there and broadcast some new seed right up on top of the food plot. And in the weeks to come, after you broadcast that out, any rain that you get and the natural freezing and thawing of the soil during those early springtime weeks is going to help suck that new seed that you just frost seeded on your food plot. Those weather conditions and those weather factors do a great job of getting those seeds right down to the bare earth, and now they're into the soil, so that when those springtime temperatures start getting up into the 60s and the 70s, your seeds are already in the ground and they're going to be germinating very quickly, and they're going to be getting that head start, at least, to grow equally with the native weeds and grasses, so that they don't get outcompeted and choked out too early in the spring. So frost seeding, in my opinion, is another fantastic way to maintain your food plots, and I would personally recommend frost seeding at least a little bit of new clover or whatever perennial food source you want to go with. I would certainly recommend frost seeding some new seed onto your food plots every spring. It's a great way to help maintain those summer food plots. Okay, and now when it comes to fall plantings, the thing with fall plantings is you're typically going to be putting in annuals such as brassicas, oats, ryegrass. There's a ton of different annuals on the market, and the great thing about annuals is they grow very, very rapidly. They're very easy to establish because they do grow so rapidly. But the kicker there is that you have to replant that food plot every season as long as it's in an annual. And I wanted to share with everybody a way that I've been converting my fall annual plots over to clover the next season is by going in and doing a frost seeding. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have I have a food plot that's in brassica, for the fall, and the deer come in there all winter and they consume that brassica food plot down to bare dirt pretty much, go in there in the very early spring once the snow melts and all that watershed's gone, I'll go in and I will frost seed, a typical planting rate of clover right on top of the ground. And in the weeks and months to come, that fall food plot from last year obviously is no longer growing. It was an annual plant. It's been eaten by the deer and turkeys and other animals. So there's nothing growing there. And because you took the time to, spray, mow, and remove those native grasses and weeds the spring before and summer before you put that into a fall planting, now you have an opportunity to get a very well established clover plot onto that previous year's fall food plot by simply doing a frost seeding, and you don't have to worry about disking your ground and all of that seedbed preparation. So frost seeding can be a great way to establish a completely new clover plot, but the key, in my opinion, is to do that on areas which was a fall annual the season before. All right, now I wanted to talk a little bit about, my philosophies on my hunting food plots. Like I mentioned earlier, most of my food plots are small, little hunting food plots. And again, the key, in my opinion, is keeping those very small, anywhere from, a twelfth to a half of an acre in size. And another key, in my opinion, is keeping a lot of edge habitat in that food plot. The more edge that food plot has, in my opinion, the more daylight utilization that food plot is going to get from all age classes of deer, but especially the more mature deer. Even mature does are going to be a lot more likely to come in and feed into a small hunting food plot where they feel safe, feel secure, and don't feel overly exposed. When you're trying to attract deer during daylight hours where you want to hunt to those larger, square-shaped food plots that don't have a lot of edge, and the deer they just find themselves to feel a lot more exposed in those areas. And in my experience, it's a lot harder to attract deer to those more exposed open food plots. So that's why I like keeping them very small, keeping a lot of edge habitat in them. I just think you're going to be a lot better off as far as attracting mature animals to those plots during daylight hours if you keep them small and keep a lot of edge habitat in those food plots. And pretty much my favorite food plot design currently is, and it's simply making, I'll simply convert a logging road or a trail system that's only 6-7 feet wide, and I'll turn those into, I call them clover lanes. It's nothing more than a several 100-yard long trail that I'll convert into a food plot and simply turn that into a clover lane. And I have, on my properties anyways, I'm finding most of the daylight deer activity on my properties, in my food plots, more often than not, the majority of that activity is coming on my small forage lanes. So that's a great way, in my opinion, to design hunting food plots, which is going to be a great way to attract animals during daylight. And it's also a great way to funnel deer movements. you can, take your weed whacker and you can weed whack this trail, or this road system. You can pretty much, make that go by a particular tree where you want to hang a tree stand, or have it go by a particular pinch point. I find it's a great way to funnel deer movements on your property and pretty much make deer travel exactly where you want them to go, because you're not only giving them a trail, through the thick brush, but you're also giving them a food plot inside of the trail. So you've got kind of a double attraction thing going there. You've got the trail, which we all know deer typically, unless they're pressured or feel safety issues there, are going to take the path of least resistance. And when that's also, doubled into a food source, it's only going to re-emphasize that activity. And it's a great way to pretty much, funnel deer activity right past specific tree stand locations. And I've had great results doing that on my properties here in New York. Okay, guys, and like I mentioned, the last thing I wanted to discuss here on the show this evening is the importance of monitoring your food plots. Now, on pretty much all of my food plots, I run a trail camera. And of course, this is a great way to see exactly what deer and what animals are using this food plot, what time of day that they're using this food plot. And it's a great way to plan your hunting strategies, and it can really help you narrow down specifically what time of day that the animals are using these particular plots. And one thing that I have found on my properties, on my food plots the last couple of years, is that there's, some food plots see more morning activity, and some food plots see more afternoon activity, and some see more evening activity. And by having trail cameras on these food plots that are monitoring those all the time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, when you go in there and do your card pulls, you can really narrow down exactly when you want to be in specific stands and hunt specific areas. So, in my opinion, monitoring your food plots with trail cameras is a very valuable tool and something that I would certainly recommend doing. And also, of course, you want to go in there and you want to monitor your food plots specifically. You want to make sure that these are still growing well and that they don't need more fertilizer. And when it comes to monitoring my food plots, pretty much what I do is every 30 to 60 days, I will go in and I'll do what I call top dressing, more fertilizer onto the food plot. And typically it's going to be anywhere from 50 to 75 pounds of fertilizer per acre. I'll go in there, and I'm just rough estimating this usually, but I want to put down 50 to 75 pounds of fertilizer per acre about every 30 to 60 days. It just finds that it helps keep those food plots lush, green, attractive to deer, and it helps keep them healthy. And as far as the fertilizer that I've specifically had the best luck with here on my food plots is on my clover food plots. I personally like to go with 6-24-24 fertilizer. It's a little bit more expensive than your standard triple 15, but in my opinion, it's worth the extra money, and it's really going to do a great job of getting those clover food plots extremely lush, extremely green, and extremely attractive to deer. So 6-24-24 fertilizer is what I use on my properties here in northern New York on my food plots, and it's what I would certainly recommend if you can get it. If not, triple 15 is also a good all around fertilizer, which certainly will serve you well on your food plots. But monitoring those food plots and making sure that they're healthy and doing well is a very important aspect of food plotting, and it's going to help keep your food plots more attractive to deer and keep the longevity of those food plots intact over the long haul. All right, guys, well, there you have it. I just wanted to do this podcast here on food plotting. Of course, it's mid-May now, and a lot of us out there are thinking about food plots, and I know a lot of guys have already gotten at it. I've already begun monitoring and working on my food plots this year, and I thought it was a good time of year to do a podcast on food plotting. I'm hoping that everybody picked up a thing or two there that they can use on their own properties, on their own food plots. Hopefully it'll help you be more successful in food plotting. If anybody has any more specific questions that they want to ask, you can shoot me a message over on the Vantage Point Outdoors Facebook page. I check on the page daily, and if you ask me any questions, I'll do my best to get you an answer. If I don't think I have a good enough answer for you, I'll make a few phone calls to some other contacts I have within the food plot community, and see if I can't get you even a better answer. So, by all means, don't hesitate to ask any questions about anything that I covered in this week's show. And again, I hope that everybody found this to be informative and can take a thing or two, which will help you in your own food plots. And I've only got one last reminder for everybody. If you enjoy what we're doing here with the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you could jump on over to iTunes and leave us a quick review on the podcast. Let us know what you think of the podcast, what we could change, if anything, what you'd like to see added to the podcast. And it's not only going to be a great way for me to get the podcast to more people so that we can hopefully help more people out with the podcast, but it's also going to be a great way for me to continue to get guests on the podcast so that we can keep covering a variety of topics that hopefully will help more people become better hunters and all around better outdoorsmen. And as always, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune into this week's show. I'm going to see you next week on an all-new episode of the TradCast.